Section 28 of the Chouans by Honoré de Balzac, translated by Ellen Marriage. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain, read by Bruce Pirie. Chapter 3M. Meanwhile, Mademoiselle de Verneuil and Francine were pondering devices for saving the Marquis from Corentin's dubious generosity and Hulot's bayonets. "I will go and warn him," the little Breton maid cried. "Mad girl, do you know where he is? I myself, with all the instincts of my heart to guide me, might search a long while for him and never find him." After devising a goodly number of the wild schemes that are so easily carried out by the fireside, Mademoiselle de Verneuil exclaimed, "When I see him, his peril will give me inspiration." Like all vehement natures, she delighted in leaving her course undecided till the last moment, trusting in her star, or in the ready wit and skill that seldom deserts a woman. Perhaps nothing had ever wrung her heart so violently before. Sometimes she seemed to remain in a kind of stupor, with her eyes set in a stare. Sometimes the slightest sound shook her from head to foot, as some half-uprooted tree quivers violently when the woodman's rope about it drags it hastily to its fall. There was a sudden loud report in the distance, as a dozen guns were fired. Mademoiselle de Verneuil turned pale, caught Francine's hand, and said, "I am dying, Francine. They have killed him." They heard the heavy footstep of a soldier in the salon, and the terrified Francine rose to admit a corporal. The Republican made a military salute and presented Mademoiselle de Verneuil with some letters written on soiled paper. As he received no acknowledgment from the young lady to whom he gave them, he said, as he withdrew, "They are from the commandant, madame." Mademoiselle de Verneuil, a prey to dark forebodings, read the letter which Hulot had probably written in haste. "Mademoiselle," so it ran, "my counter-Chouans have seized one of the Guards' messengers, who has just been shot. Among the letters thus intercepted is the one that I send, which may be of some use to you," etc. "Heaven be thanked it was not he whom they killed," she cried as she threw the letter into the fire. She breathed more freely, and eagerly read the note that had just been sent to her. It was from the Marquis, and appeared to be addressed to Madame du Groix. "No, my angel, this evening I shall not be at the Vivetière, and this evening you will lose your wager with the Count, for I shall triumph over the Republic in the person of this delicious girl, who is certainly worth a knight, as you must agree. This is the only real advantage that I have gained in the campaign, for La Vendée is submitting. There is nothing left for us to do in France, and we will, of course, return to England together. But serious business tomorrow." The note slipped from her fingers. She closed her eyes and lay back in absolute silence, with her head propped by a cushion. After a long pause, she raised her eyes to the clock and read the hour. It was 4 in the afternoon. "And my lord is keeping me waiting," she said with savage irony. "Oh, perhaps he could not come," said Francine. "If he does not come," said Marie in a smothered voice, "I will go myself to find him. But no, he cannot be much longer now. Francine, am I very beautiful?" "You are very pale." "Look round," Mademoiselle de Verneuil went on. "Might not the perfumed room, the flowers and the lights, this intoxicating vapour, and everything here, give an idea of a paradise to him whom to-night I will steep in the bliss of love?" "What is the matter, mademoiselle?" I am betrayed, deceived, thwarted, cheated, duped, and ruined. I will kill him. I will tear him in pieces. Oh, yes, there was always something contemptuous in his manner that he scarcely concealed, but I would not see it. Oh, this will kill me. What a fool I am, she laughed. He is on his way, and tonight I will teach him that whether wedded to me or no, the man who has possessed me can never forsake me afterwards. My revenge shall be commensurate with his offense. He shall die in despair. I thought that there was something great in him, but he is the son of a lackey, there is no question of it. Truly, he has deceived me cleverly. Even now I can scarcely believe that the man who was capable of giving me up to Pia Miche without mercy could condescend to trickery not unworthy of Scapin. It is so easy to dupe a loving woman that it is the lowest depth of baseness. He might kill me, well and good, but that he should lie to me who had set him on high. To the scaffold with him. I wish I could see him guillotined. Am I so very cruel? He shall go to his death covered with kisses and caresses, which will have been worth 20 years of life to him. Marie, said Francine, with angelic meekness, be the victim of your lover, as so many another has been, but do not be his mistress or his executioner. In the depths of your heart you can keep his image, and it need not make you cruel to yourself. If there were no joy in love when hope is gone, what would become of us, poor women that we are? God, of whom you never think, Marie, will reward us for having submitted to our lot upon earth, to our vocation of loving and suffering. Little puss, answered Mademoiselle de Verneuil, as she stroked Francine's hand. Your voice is very sweet and very winning. Reason, when she takes your form, has many charms. How I wish that I could obey you. You will forgive him? You will not give him up? Hush, do not speak of that man any more. Corentin is a noble creature compared with him. Do you understand me? She rose to her feet. Her wild thoughts and unquenchable thirst for vengeance were concealed beneath the dreadful quietness of her face. The very slowness of her measured footsteps seemed to betoken the fixed purpose in her mind in an indescribable way. Devouring this insult, tormented by her own thoughts, and too proud to own to the least of her pangs, she went to the guardhouse in St. Leonard's Gate to ask to be directed to the commandant's lodging. She had scarcely left the house when Corentin entered it. "Oh, Monsieur Corentin," cried Francine, "if you are interested in that young man, save him. Mademoiselle will give him up. This wretched paper has ruined everything." Corentin took up the letter carelessly. "Where is she gone?" he inquired. "I do not know." "I will hurry after her," he said, "to save her from her own despair." He vanished, taking the letter with him, hurried out of the house with all speed, and spoke to the little boy who was playing about before the door. "Which way did the lady go when she went out just now?" Galop Chopin's son went several paces with Corentin and pointed out the steep road which led to St. Leonard's Gate. "That way," he said without hesitating, faithful to the instinct of vengeance that his mother had inspired in him. While he was speaking, 4 men in disguise, entered Mademoiselle de Verneuil's house, but neither Corentin nor the little boy saw them. "Go back to your post," the spy said. "Look as though you were amusing yourself by turning the latches on the shutters, but keep a sharp lookout in every direction, even upon the roofs." Corentin sped in the direction pointed out by the child. He thought that he recognized Mademoiselle de Verneuil in the fog, and as a matter of fact, he came up with her just as she reached Saint Leonard's gate. "Where are you going?" said he, offering his arm to her. "You look pale. What can have happened? Is it fitting for you to go out alone in this way? Take my arm." "Where is the commandant?" she asked him. Mademoiselle de Verneuil had scarcely finished the sentence when she heard a reconnoitering party moving outside Saint Leonard's gate, and soon distinguished Hulot's deep bass voice among the other confused sounds. "Tonnerre de Dieu!" he exclaimed. "I have never seen it thicker than it is just now when we are making the rounds. The ci devant seems to have the control of the weather." "What are you grumbling at?" said Mademoiselle de Verneuil as she grasped his arm tightly. "The fog can hide vengeance as well as perfidy. Commandant," she went on in a low voice, "it is a question now of taking such measures in concert with me that the Gare shall not escape us this time." "Is he in your house?" he asked, and there was a troubled sound in his voice that showed his astonishment. "No," she replied, "but give me a man that can be depended upon, and I will send him to you to warn you of the Marquis's arrival." "What are you doing?" Corentin asked with eager haste. "A soldier in your house will scare him, but a child, I will find one, will not awaken suspicion." "Commandant," Mademoiselle de Verneuil resumed, "you can surround my house at once, thanks to this fog that you execrate. Post soldiers about it in every direction. Place a picket in Saint Leonard's church, so as to secure the esplanade, which is overlooked by my windows. Post men on the promenade itself, for though my window is 20 feet from the ground, despair sometimes gives strength sufficient to overleap the most perilous distances. Listen, I shall probably send this gentleman away through the house door. So you must give the task of watching it to none but a brave man, for no one can deny his courage," she said, heaving a sigh, "and he will fight for his life." "Gaudin!" cried the commandant. The young Fougeray sprang forward. He had been standing in the midst of the knot of men who had returned with Hulot, and who had remained drawn up in rank at a little distance. "Listen, my boy," the old soldier said in low tones. "This confounded girl is betraying the Gare to us. I don't know why, but no matter, that is not our business. Take 10 men with you, and post them so as to guard the blind alley and the girl's house at the end of it. But you must manage so that neither you nor your men are seen." "Yes, Commandant, I know the ground." "Well, my boy," Hulot went on, "I will send Beaupied to you to let you know when the moment comes to be up and doing. Try to tackle the Marquis yourself, and if you can kill him so that I shall not have to try him first and shoot him afterwards, you shall be a lieutenant in a fortnight, or my name is not Hulot." "Here, mademoiselle," he said as he pointed to Gaudin, "here is a brave fellow who will flinch from nothing. He will keep a sharp lookout before your house, and whether the ci devant comes out or tries to go in, he will not miss him." Gaudin set out with his 10 soldiers. "Do you clearly understand what you are about?" Corentin murmured to Mademoiselle de Verneuil. She made him no answer. With a kind of satisfaction she watched the men start, under the orders of the sub-lieutenant, to post themselves on the promenade, and yet others, who, in obedience to Hulot's directions, took up their position along the dark walls of St. Leonard's church. "There are houses adjoining mine," she said to the commandant. "Surround them also. Let us not lay up matter for repentance by neglecting a single precaution that we ought to take." "She is mad," thought Hulot. "Am I not a prophet?" Corentin said in his ear. "The child I shall send to the house is the little Gare with the bloody foot, so that—" He did not finish. Mademoiselle de Verneuil had suddenly darted away towards her house, whither he followed her, whistling like a happy man. When he came up with her, she had already reached her doorstep, where Corentin once more found Galop Chopin's son. "Mademoiselle," he said, "take this little fellow with you. You could not have a more guileless and active messenger." Then he breathed, so to speak, the following words into the little lad's ear. "When you have once seen the Gare within the house, no matter what they say to you, run away, come and find me at the guardhouse, and I will give you enough to find you in bread for the rest of your life." Corentin felt his hand squeezed hard by the young Breton, who followed Mademoiselle de Verneuil. "Now, my good friends, come to an explanation whenever you like," cried Corentin when the door was shut. "If you make love, my lord Marquis, it will be over your own shroud." Yet Corentin could not bring himself to go out of sight of that fatal house, and betook himself to the promenade, where he found the commandant busily giving orders. Night soon came on. 2 hours passed by, and still the different sentries distributed at their posts had seen nothing that could lead them to suspect that the Marquis had come through the triple line of men who were watching from their hiding places along the 3 sides of Papago's tower, by which access was possible. Corentin had walked from the promenade to the guardhouse a score of times, and each time his expectations had been disappointed, and his young messenger had not yet come to find him. Plunged in deep thought, the spy strolled slowly along the promenade, undergoing the martyrdom to which 3 terrible conflicting passions subjected him, a victim to love, ambition, and greed of gold. It struck 8 on all the clocks. The moon rose late, so that the scene on which this drama of his own devising was about to come to a crisis was wrapped in appalling gloom by the darkness and the thick fog. The agent of police managed to suppress his passions. He locked his arms over his breast and never took his eyes off the window that stood out above the tower like a gleaming phantom shape. Whenever his steps led him to the side of the promenade nearest the valleys, along the brink of the precipices, he mechanically scrutinized the fog, with the long pale streaks of light flung across it here and there, from some window among the houses in the town or suburbs, above or below the fortifications. The deep silence that prevailed was only troubled by the murmur of the Nanson, by melancholy sounds at intervals from the belfry, or by the footsteps of the sentinels and the clank of weapons when they came to relieve guard hour by hour. Everything, men and nature alike, had grown solemn. "It is as dark as a wolf's throat," Pie Amiche remarked just then. "Go along," replied Marcheterre, "and keep as quiet as a dead dog." "I scarcely draw my breath," the Chouan retorted. If the man who let a stone roll down just now wants my knife to find a sheath in his heart, he has only to do it again, said Marcheterre, in so low a voice that it mingled confusedly with the murmur of the Nanson. Why, it was I, said Piamiche. Well, old money-bag, creep along on your belly like a snake, or we shall leave our carcasses here before there is any occasion for it. Hi, Marcheterre, the incorrigible Piamiche began again. He had laid himself flat on the ground, and was using both hands to hoist himself onto the path where his comrade was, and now he spoke in the ear of the latter in so low a voice that the Chouans following behind did not catch a syllable that he said. Hi, Marcheterre, if we are to believe our grande garce, there is a glorious lot of plunder up there. Will you go halves? Listen, Piamiche, said Marcheterre, as, still flat on his stomach, he came to a stop, a movement imitated by the whole troop of Chouans, so exhausted were they by the difficulties of their progress up the steep sides of the precipice. I know you for one of those honest grab-alls who are as fond of giving hard knocks as of taking them when there is no other choice. We have not come here after dead men's shoes. It is devil against devil, and woe to them that have the shorter claws. The Grande Garce sent us here to rescue the Gars. That is where he is. Look, lift up your dog's head and look at that window up above the tower. It was on the stroke of midnight as he spoke. The moon rose, and the fog began to look like pale smoke. Piamiche gripped Marcheterre's arm violently and pointed out, without making a sound, the gleaming triangular blades of several bayonets some 10 feet above them. The Blues are there already, said Piamiche. We have not a chance against them. Patience, replied Marcheterre. If I looked into it thoroughly this morning, there should be, somewhere about the base of the Papago's tower and between the ramparts and the promenade, a place where they are always heaping manure. One can drop down onto it as if it were a bed. If Saint-Labre would turn all the blood that will be shed into good cider, the Fougères people would find a very ample supply of it tomorrow, remarked Piamiche. Marcheterre laid his great hand over his friend's mouth. Then the muttered caution that he gave passed from line to line till it reached the last Chouan, who clung aloft to the heather on the schistous rock. As a matter of fact, Corentin was standing on the edge of the esplanade, and his ears were too accustomed to vigilance not to detect the rustling noises made by the shrubs as the Chouans pulled and twisted them, and the faint sound of the pebbles that fell to the foot of the precipice below. Marcheterre apparently possessed the gift of seeing through the darkness, or his senses had become as acute as those of a savage by being constantly called into play. He had caught sight of Corentin, or perhaps he had scented him like a well-trained dog. The diplomatist spy listened intently to the silence, and scanned the natural wall of the schist, but he could discover nothing there. If the hazy, dubious light allowed him to see a few of the Chouans at all, he took them for fragments of the rock, so thoroughly did the living bodies preserve the appearance of inanimate nature. The danger to the troop did not last long. Corentin's attention was called away by a very distinct and audible sound which came from the other end of the promenade, at a spot where the buttress wall came to an end and the sheer face of the rock began. A pathway that ran along the edge of the schist and communicated with the Queen's staircase also ended at this point, just where the rock and the masonry met. As Corentin reached the spot, a form rose up as if by magic before his eyes, and when, feeling doubtful as to its intentions, he stretched out a hand to lay hold of the being, phantom or otherwise, he grasped the soft and rounded outlines of a woman. "The devil take it, good woman," he muttered in a low tone. "If you had happened on anyone else, you might have come in for a bullet through your head. Where do you come from, and where are you going at this time of night? Are you dumb?" "It really is a woman, at any rate," said he to himself. Silence was growing dangerous, so the stranger replied, in tones that showed her great alarm. "Oh, I am coming back from an up-sitting, master." "It is the Marquis's make-believe mother," said Corentin to himself. "Let us see what she will do." "All right, go along that way, old woman," he went on aloud, pretending not to recognize her. "Go to the left, if you don't want to be shot." He stood motionless, till, seeing that Madame Dugois turned in the direction of the Papego's tower, he followed her at a distance with diabolical cunning. While this fateful meeting was taking place, the Chouans had very cleverly taken up their position on the manure heap to which Marcheterre had guided them. "There is the Grande Garce," muttered Marcheterre to himself, while he shuffled along the side of the tower as a bear might have done. "Here we are," he said to the lady. "Good," Madame Dugois replied. "If you can find a ladder about the house or in the garden that comes to an end about 6 feet below the manure heap, the Gare will be saved. Do you see the round window up there? It is in a dressing-room that opens out of the bedroom, and you must reach it. This side of the tower, at the foot of which you are standing, is the one side that is not surrounded. The horses are ready. And if you have guarded the ford of the Nanson, we ought to have him out of danger in 15 minutes, in spite of his folly. But if that wench tries to follow him, stab her." Corentin now perceived, through the gloom, that a few of the vague shapes which he had at first taken for rocks were moving stealthily. He went at once to the guard at Saint Leonard's gate, where he found the commandant fully dressed, but sleeping on a camp bed. "Let him alone," Beaupier said roughly to Corentin. "He has only just lain down." "The Chouans are here!" cried Corentin in Hulot's ears. "Impossible, but so much the better," said the commandant, heavy with sleep though he was. "There will be fighting, at any rate." When Hulot came to the promenade, Corentin pointed out to him, through the darkness, the strange position occupied by the Chouans. "They have either outwitted or gagged the sentries that I posted between the Queen's staircase and the castle," exclaimed the commandant. "By Jove, what a fog it is! But patience. I will send 50 men and a lieutenant round to the base of the cliff. We must not set upon them from above, for the brutes are so tough that they will let themselves drop to the bottom of the precipice like stones, and never break a limb." The cracked bell in the church tower struck 2 as the commandant came back to the promenade after taking the most stringent measures a soldier could devise for surprising and seizing Marcheterre and the Chouans under his command. Every guard had been doubled, so that by this time Mademoiselle de Verneuil's house had become the central point about which a small army was gathered. The commandant found Corentin absorbed in contemplation of the window that looked out over the Papego's tower. "Citizen," said Hulot, addressing him, "it is my belief that the ci-devant is making fools of us all, for nothing has stirred so far." "There he is," cried Corentin, pointing to the window. "I saw a man's shadow on the curtains, but I do not understand what has become of my little boy. They have killed him or gained him over. Look there, Commandant, do you see? It is a man. Let us go." "Tonnerre de Dieu, I'm not going to arrest him in bed. If he is in there, he's sure to come out. Gaudin will not miss him," replied Hulot, who had his own reasons for delay. "Come now, Commandant, in the name of the law, I command you to advance instantly upon the house." "You are a pretty fellow, at all events, to think to order me about." The Commandant's wrath did not trouble Corentin. "You will obey me," he said coolly, "for here is an order drawn up in due form and signed by the Minister of War, which will compel you to do so." He drew a paper from his pocket. "Do you really think that we are fools enough to let that girl act according to her own notions? We are stamping out civil war, and the greatness of the end in view justifies the littleness of the means employed." "I take the liberty, citizen, of sending you to— You understand? That is enough, then. Put your best foot foremost, and let me alone, and do it in less than no time." "Read this first," said Corentin. "Don't plague me about your business," cried Hulot, furious at receiving orders from a creature, in his opinion, so despicable. Galop Chopin's son started up between the two at that moment, like a rat out of a hole in the ground. "The guy is going," he cried. "Which way?" "Along the Rue Saint-Léonard." "Beaupied," Hulot whispered to the corporal who was standing beside him, "run and tell your lieutenant to approach the house and to keep up some nice little file firing upon it. Do you understand? File to the left and march towards the tower," the commandant shouted to the rest of the men. End of section 28. Section 29 of the Chouans by Honoré de Balzac, translated by Ellen Marriage. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Bruce Pirie. Chapter 3N. It is necessary, if the close of the drama is to be clearly understood, to return and to enter Mademoiselle de Verneuil's house with her. When the passions are excited to the highest pitch, the intoxication that they produce is far more complete than anything affected by those paltry stimulants, wine and opium. The clearness of ideas to which we attain at such times, the subtle keenness of our overexcited senses, bring about the strangest and most unexpected results. Beneath the arbitrary sway of one sole thought, certain temperaments can clearly perceive the least perceptible things, while the most obvious matters are for them as though they had no existence. Mademoiselle de Verneuil had fallen a victim to the kind of intoxication which makes our actual existence seem to be like the life of a somnambulist. When she had read Montaron's letter, she had ordered all things in such a way that he could not escape her vengeance, just as eagerly as she had but lately made every preparation for the first festival of her love. But when she saw her house carefully surrounded by her own orders, with a triple line of bayonets, a sudden gleam of light shone through her soul. She sat in judgment upon her conduct, and thought with a kind of revulsion that she had just perpetrated a crime. Her first uneasy impulse led her to spring to the threshold of her door, and to stay there motionless for a brief space, trying to reflect, but utterly unable to follow out a train of thought. She was so little aware of what she had just done that she wondered why she was standing in the vestibule of her own house, holding a strange child by the hand. Myriads of sparks, like little tongues of flame, swam in the air before her. She took a step or two to shake off the dreadful numbness that had crept over her senses, but nothing appeared to her in its true shape or with its real colors. She was like one that slept. She seized the little boy's hand with a roughness that was not usual to her, and drew him along so hurriedly that she seemed to possess the activity of a madwoman. She saw nothing whatever in the salon when she crossed it, though 3 men greeted her and stood apart to allow her to pass. "Here she is," said one of them. "She is very beautiful," the priest exclaimed. "Yes," replied the first speaker, "but how pale and troubled she is." "And how absent-minded," said the third. "She does not see us." At the door of her own room, Mademoiselle de Verneuil saw Francine, who whispered to her with a sweet and happy face, "He is there, Marie." Mademoiselle de Verneuil seemed to awake and to be able to think. She looked down at the child whose hand she held, recognized him, and said to Francine, "Shut this little boy up somewhere, and if you wish me to live, be very careful not to let him escape." While she slowly uttered the words, she turned her eyes on the door of her room, on which they rested with such appalling fixity that it might have been thought that she saw her victim through the thickness of the panels. She softly pushed the door open and closed it without turning herself, for she saw the Marquis standing before the hearth. He was handsomely but not too elaborately dressed, and there was an air of festival about the young noble's attire that added to the radiance with which lovers are invested in women's eyes. At the sight of him, all Mademoiselle de Verneuil's presence of mind returned to her. The white enamel of her teeth showed between the tightly strained lines of her half-opened lips, which described a set smile that expressed dread rather than delight. With slow steps she went towards the young noble, and, pointing to the clock, she spoke with hollow mirth. "A man who is worthy of love is well worth the anxiety with which he is expected." But the violence of her feelings overcame her. She fell back upon the sofa that stood near the fire. "Dear Marie, you are very charming when you are angry," said the Marquis, seating himself beside her, taking her passive hand, and entreating a glance which she would not give. "I hope," he went on in a tender and soothing voice, "that in another moment Marie will be very vexed with herself for having hidden her face from her fortunate husband." She turned sharply as the words fell on her ear, and gazed into his eyes. "What does that terrible look mean?" he went on, smiling. "But your hand is as hot as fire. My love, what is it?" "My love," she echoed, in a stifled, unnatural voice. "Yes," he said, falling on his knees before her, and taking both her hands, which he covered with kisses. "Yes, my love, I am yours for life." Impetuously she pushed him from her, and rose to her feet. Her features were distorted. She laughed like a maniac as she said, "You do not mean one word of it. You are baser than the vilest criminal." She sprang quickly towards the dagger which lay beside a vase, and flashed it within a few inches of the astonished young man's breast. "Bah!" she said, flinging down the weapon. "I have not enough esteem for you to kill you. Your blood is too vile even for the soldiers to shed. I see nothing but the executioner before you." The words came from her with difficulty, and were uttered in a low voice. She stamped her foot like a spoiled child in a passion. The Marquis went up to her and tried to clasp her in his arms. "Do not touch me," she cried, drawing back in horror. "She is mad," said the Marquis, speaking aloud in his despair. "Yes, I am mad," she repeated, "but not yet so mad as to be a toy for you. What would I not forgive to passionate love, but that you should think to possess me without any love for me? That you should write and say so to that—" "To whom have I written?" he asked in amazement that was clearly unfeigned. "To that virtuous woman who wished to kill me." The Marquis turned pale at this, and grasped the back of the armchair by which he was standing so tightly that he broke it, as he cried, "If Madame de Gouin has been guilty of any foul play—" Mademoiselle de Verneuil looked round for the letter and could not find it again. She called Francine, and the Breton maid came. "Where is the letter?" "Monsieur Corentin took it away with him." "Corentin? Ah, I understand everything now. That letter was his doing. He has deceived me, as he can deceive with diabolical ingenuity." She went to the sofa and sank down upon it with a piercing wail, and a flood of tears fell from her eyes. Doubt and certainty were equally horrible. The Marquis flung himself at his mistress's feet and clasped her to his breast, saying over and over again for her the only words that he could pronounce. "Why do you weep, dear angel? What is the trouble? Your scornful words are full of love. Do not weep. I love you forever." Suddenly he felt that she clasped him to her with superhuman strength, and in the midst of her sobs she said, "You love me still?" "Can you doubt it?" he answered, and his tone was almost sad. She withdrew herself suddenly from his arms, and sprang back 2 paces, as if in confusion and dread. "If I doubt it!" she cried. She saw the Marquis smiling at her with such gentle irony that the words died away on her lips. She let him take her hand and lead her as far as the threshold. Marie saw, at the end of the salon, an altar that had been hastily erected during her absence. The priest, who had resumed his ecclesiastical garb, was there, and the light upon the ceiling from the shining altar candles was sweet as hope. She recognized the 2 men who had before saluted her. They were the Comte de Bourbon and the Baron du Guénic, the 2 witnesses whom Montauran had chosen. "Will you still refuse?" the Marquis asked her in a low voice. But when she saw the scene before her, she shrank back a step so as to reach her own room again, and fell upon her knees before the Marquis, and raised her hands to him, and cried, "Oh, forgive me! Forgive, forgive!" Her voice died in her throat. Her head fell back, her eyes were closed, and she lay as if dead in the arms of the Marquis and of Francine. When she opened her eyes again, she met the gaze of the young chief, a look full of kindness and of love. "Patience, Marie, this is the last storm," he said. "Yes, the last," she echoed. Francine and the Marquis looked at each other in surprise, but she enjoined silence on them both by a gesture. "Ask the priest to come," she said, and leave me alone with him." They withdrew. "Father," she said to the priest who suddenly appeared before her, "when I was a child, an old man with white hair like you often used to tell me that if it is asked with a living faith, one can obtain anything of God. Is that true?" "It is true," the priest answered. "All things are possible to him who has created all things." Mademoiselle de Verneuil threw herself on her knees with incredible fervor. "O God," she cried in her ecstasy, "my faith in thee is as great as my love for him. Inspire me, work a miracle here, or take my life." "Your prayer will be heard," said the priest. Mademoiselle de Verneuil came out to meet the eyes of those assembled, leaning upon the arm of the old white-haired priest. It was a profound emotion hidden in the depths of her heart that gave her to her lover's love. She was more beautiful now than on any bygone day, for such a serenity as painters love to give to martyrs' faces had set its seal upon her and lent grandeur to her face. She gave her hand to the Marquis, and together they went towards the altar where they knelt. This marriage, which was about to be solemnized 2 paces from the nuptial couch, the hastily erected altar, the crucifix, the vases, the chalice brought secretly by the priest, the fumes of incense floating beneath the cornices, which hitherto had only seen the steam of everyday meals, the priest who had simply slipped a stole over his cassock, the altar candles in a dwelling-room, all united to make a strange and touching scene which completes the picture of those days of sorrowful memory, when civil discord had overthrown the most sacred institutions. In those times, religious ceremonies had all the charm of mysteries. Children were privately baptized in the rooms where their mothers still groaned. As of old, the Lord went in simplicity and poverty to console the dying. Young girls received the sacred wafer for the first time on the spot where they had been playing only the night before. The marriage of the Marquis and Mademoiselle de Verneuil was about to be solemnized, like so many other marriages, with an act forbidden by the new legislation. But all these marriages, celebrated for the most part beneath the oak trees, were afterwards scrupulously sanctioned by law. The priest who thus preserved the ancient usages to the last was one of those men who are faithful to their principles in the height of the storm. His voice, guiltless of the oath required by the Republic, only breathed words of peace through the tempest. He did not stir up the fires of insurrection, as the Abbé Gaudin had been wont to do, but he had devoted himself, like many others, to the dangerous task of fulfilling the duties of the priest towards such souls as remained faithful to the Catholic Church. In order to carry out his perilous mission successfully, he made use of all the pious artifices to which persecution compelled him to resort, so that the Marquis had only succeeded in finding him in one of those underground hiding-places which bear the name of the priest's hole, even in our own day. The sight of his pale, worn face inspired such devout feelings and respect in others that it transformed the worldly aspect of the salon and made it seem like a holy place. Everything was in readiness for the act that should bring misfortune and joy. In the deep silence before the ceremony began, the priest asked for the name of the bride. "Marie Nathalie daughter of Mademoiselle Blanche de Casteran, late abbess of Notre-Dame de Sèze, and of Victor Amédée, Duc de Verneuil. Born at La Chasterie, near Alençon. I should have not thought that Montaran would have been fool enough to marry her, the Baron whispered to the Count. The natural daughter of a duke, out upon it. If she had been a king's daughter, he might have been excused, the Comte de Bourbon said with a smile, but I am not the one to blame him. I have a liking for the other, and I mean to lay siege to Charrette's filly now. There's not much coup about her. Montaran's designations having been previously filled in, the lovers set their names to the document, and the names of the witnesses followed. The ceremony began, and, all the while, no one but Marie heard the sound of arms and the heavy even tread of the soldiers coming to relieve the Blues, who were doubtless on guard before St. Leonard's Church, where she herself had posted them. She shuddered, and raised her eyes to the crucifix upon the altar. "She is a saint," murmured Francine. "Give me saints of that sort, and I will turn deucedly devout," the Count said to himself in a low voice. When the priest put the usual question to Mademoiselle de Verneuil, her answering "yes" came with a heavy sigh. She leaned over and said in her husband's ear, "In a little while you will know why I break the vow that I made never to marry you." The rite was over, and those who had been present passed out into the room where dinner had been served, when, just as the guests were sitting down, Jeremiah came in a state of great terror. The unhappy bride rose at once and went up to him, followed by Francine. Then, making one of the excuses that women can devise so readily, she begged the Marquis to do the honours of the feast by himself for a few moments, and hurried the servant away before he could commit any blunder that might prove fatal. "Oh, Francine," she said, "what a thing it is to feel oneself at the brink of death, and to be unable to say, 'I am dying.'" Mademoiselle de Verneuil did not return. An excuse for her absence could be found in the ceremony that had just been concluded. When the meal came to an end, and the Marquis's anxiety had risen to its height, Marie came back in all the splendour of her bridal array. She looked calm and happy, while Francine, who had returned with her, bore traces of such profound terror on all her features that those assembled seemed to see in the faces of the two women some such strange picture as the eccentric brush of Salvator Rosa might have painted, representing death and life holding each other by the hand. "Gentlemen," she said, addressing the priest, the Baron, and the Count, "you must be my guests tonight. Any attempt to leave Fougères would be too hazardous. I have given orders to this good girl here to conduct each of you to his own room. No resistance, I beg," as the priest was about to speak. "I hope that you will not refuse to obey a bride on her wedding day." An hour later she was alone with her lover in the bridal chamber that she had made so fair. They stood at last beside the fatal couch where so many hopes are blighted as by the tomb, where the chances of an awakening to a happy life are so uncertain, where love dies or comes into being according to the power of the character that is only finally tested there. Marie looked at the clock and said to herself, 6 hours to live. "So I have been able to sleep," she exclaimed, when, as morning drew near, she woke with the shock of the sudden start that disturbs us when we have agreed with ourselves on the previous evening to wake at a certain hour. "Yes, I have slept," she repeated, as she saw by the candlelight that the hand on the dial of the clock pointed to the hour of 2. She turned and gazed at the Marquis, who was sleeping with one hand beneath his head, as children do, while the other hand grasped that of his wife. He was half smiling, as though he had fallen asleep in the midst of a kiss. "Ah," she murmured to herself, "he is slumbering like a child. But how could he feel mistrust of me who owe him unspeakable happiness?" She touched him gently. He awoke and smiled in earnest. He kissed the hand that he held, and gazed at the unhappy woman before him with such glowing eyes that she could not endure the passionate light in them, and slowly drooped her heavy eyelids as if to shut out a spectacle fraught with peril for her. But while she thus veiled the glowing warmth of her own eyes, she so provoked the desire to which she appeared to refuse herself, that if she had not had a profound dread to conceal, her husband might have reproached her with too much coquetry. They both raised their charming heads at the same moment, with a sign full of gratitude for the pleasures that they had experienced. But after a moment's survey of the exquisite picture presented by his wife's face, the Marquis, thinking that Marie's brow was overshadowed by some feeling of melancholy, said to her softly, "Why that shade of sadness, love?" "Poor Alphonse, whither do you think I have brought you?" she asked, trembling. "To happiness." "Nay, to death." Quivering with horror, she sprang out of bed, followed by the astonished Marquis. His wife led him to the window. A frenzied gesture escaped Marie as she drew back the curtains and pointed to a score of soldiers in the square. The fog had dispersed, and the white moonlight fell on their uniforms and muskets, on the imperturbable Corentin, who came and went like a jackal on the lookout for his prey, and on the commandant, who stood there motionless with folded arms, with his head thrown back and his mouth pursed up, in an alert and uneasy attitude. "Let them be, Marie, and come back." "Why do you laugh, Alphonse? It was I who posted them there." "You are dreaming." "Nay." For a moment they looked at each other, and the Marquis understood it all. He clasped her in his arms. "What of that?" he said. "I love you for ever." "All is not lost, even now," cried Marie. "Alphonse," she said after a pause, "there is yet hope." Just then they distinctly heard the stifled cry of a screech-owl, and Francine suddenly entered from the dressing-room. "Pierre is there!" she cried in almost frenzied joy. The Marquise and Francine dressed Monteron in a Chouans costume, with the marvellous quickness that women alone possess. When Marie saw that her husband was busy loading the firearms that Francine had brought for him, she quickly slipped away, making a sign to her faithful Breton maid. Francine led the Marquis into the adjoining dressing-room. At the sight of a number of sheets securely knotted together, the young chief could appreciate the alert activity with which the Breton girl had done her work, as she sought to disappoint the watchfulness of the soldiers. "I can never get through," the Marquis said, as he made a survey of the narrow embrasure of the round window. But the circular opening was just then blocked up by a great dark countenance, and the hoarse voice that Francine knew so well cried softly, "Quick, General, those toads of blues are on the move." "Oh, one more kiss," said a sweet and trembling voice. Montaran's feet were set on the ladder by which he was to escape, but he had not yet extricated himself from the window, and he felt himself clasped in a desperate embrace. He uttered a cry, for he saw that his wife had dressed herself in his clothes, and tried to hold her fast, but she tore herself hastily from his arms, and he was obliged to descend the ladder. In his hand he kept a scrap of some woven material, and a sudden gleam of moonlight showed him that it must be a strip of the waistcoat that he had worn on the previous evening. "Halt! Fire by platoons!" Hulot's words spoken broke the deep stillness that had something hideous about it, and snapped the charm that seemed hitherto to have prevailed over the place and the men in it. The sound of a salvo of balls at the base of the tower in the valley bottom followed hard upon the firing of the blues upon the promenade. Volley succeeded volley without interruption. The Republicans kept up their fire mercilessly, but no sound was uttered by the victims. There was a horrible silence between each discharge. Corentin, however, suspected some trap, for he had heard one of the men whom he had pointed out to the commandant drop from his lofty position at the top of the ladder. "Not one of those animals makes a sound," he remarked to Hulot. "Our pair of lovers are quite capable of keeping us amused by some sort of trick, while they themselves are perhaps escaping in another direction." The spy, in his eagerness to obtain light on this mystery, sent Galop Chopin's child to find some torches. Hulot had caught the drift of Corentin's suspicions so aptly that the old soldier, who was preoccupied with the sounds of an obstinate encounter that was taking place near the guardhouse in St. Leonard's Gate, exclaimed, "True, there cannot be two of them," and rushed off in that direction. "We have given him a leaden shower bath, Commandant," so Beaupied greeted his commandant, "but he has killed Goudin and wounded 2 more men. Ah, the madman! He had broken through 3 lines of our fellows and would have got away into the open country if it had not been for the sentry at St. Leonard's Gate, who spitted him on his bayonet." The commandant hurried into the guardhouse on hearing this piece of news, and saw a blood-stained body stretched out upon the camp bed where it had just been laid. He went up to the man whom he believed to be the Marquis, raised the hat that covered his face, and dropped into a chair. "I thought so," he cried vehemently, as he folded his arms. "Sacré tonnerre! She had kept him too long." The soldiers stood about motionless. The commandant's movement had uncoiled a woman's long dark hair. The silence was suddenly broken by the sounds of a crowd of armed men. Corentin came into the guardhouse, followed by 4 men, who had made a kind of stretcher of their muskets, upon which they were carrying Montaran, whose legs and arms had been broken by many gunshots. They laid the Marquis on the camp bed beside his wife. He saw her, and found strength sufficient to take her hand in a convulsive clasp. The dying girl turned her head painfully, recognized her husband, and a sudden spasm shook her that was terrible to see, as she murmured in a nearly inaudible voice, "A day without a morrow. God has heard me, indeed." "Commandant," said the Marquis, summoning all his strength to speak, while he still held Marie's hand in his, "I depend upon your loyalty to send word of my death to my young brother in London. Write to him, and tell him that if he would fain obey my last wishes, he will not bear arms against France. But he will never forsake the service of the king." "It shall be done," said Hulot, pressing the hand of the dying man. "Take them to the hospital nearby," cried Corentin. Hulot grasped the spy by the arm in such a sort that he left the marks of his nails in the flesh, as he said to him, "Since your task here is ended, be off, and take a good look at the face of Commandant Hulot, so that you may never cross his path again, unless you have a mind to have his cutlass through your body." The old soldier drew his sabre as he spoke. "There is another of your honest folk who will never make their fortunes," said Corentin to himself when he was well away from the guardhouse. The Marquis was still able to thank his enemy by a movement of the head, expressing a soldier's esteem for a generous foe. In 1827, an old man, accompanied by his wife, was bargaining for cattle in the market of Fougères. Nobody took any special heed of him, though in his time he had killed more than 100 men. No one even reminded him of his nickname of marche à terre. The person to whom valuable information concerning the actors in this drama is owing saw the man as he led a cow away. There was that look of homely simplicity about him which prompts the remark, "That is a very honest fellow." As for Cibot, otherwise called Piamiche, his end has been witnessed already. Perhaps Marcheterre made a vain attempt to rescue his comrade from the scaffold, and was present in the marketplace of Alençon at the terrific riot that occurred during the famous trials of Rifouel, Briand, and La Chanterie. End of section 29. End of The Chouans by Honoré de Balzac, translated by Ellen Marriage.